And now to lead the session, I hand over to Javad Mushtaq. Javad is the founder and CEO of several social startups, including MAK, MAC, Systems Change Diversity and Inclusion, and Mean Mentor, Education for All Reduction of Dropouts Rates. Javad is also the founder and managing partner of JM Ventures, Norway's first impact investment and advisory firm focusing on diversity, innovation, and startups. Over to you, Javad.
Much, Gloria, for the very kind introduction, and welcome everybody to be part of this session on diversity, equity, and inclusion. As Gloria mentioned, my name is Javad Mushtaq. I'll tell you a bit more about my background, and I do apologize in advance for the slight noise in the background. Somebody just chose to drill in their apartment above me today in the exact time when I'm supposed to present. Hopefully this can be an interactive session. I do have material that I can walk through and share. But at the same time, I really hope that you use the chat function to ask questions or share your thoughts and reflections. But also, if you have any good best practices or cases that you would want to share. So, and at a later stage as well, I see there's a few requests to speak. We'll allow people later in the session as well. But before we start diving into the material, and a lot of this is material that you probably have seen before, just to reiterate the importance of diversity, equity, and inclusion. I want to turn the time back around 50 years to share a bit more about my story and why I got interested in working on this topic for the past 10 years. So I'm a second generation Norwegian Pakistani, and approximately 50 years ago, there was two big pivotal elements and events that happened in this country which would pave the pathway for me and also my story. The first one was Norway found oil. Before that, Norway didn't have much wealth. This laid the foundation for building the social welfare state that we have today, and really building the economy we have today, but not necessarily the economy we want to build for the future. And the second was that my dad was part of the large immigration wave to Norway in the early 70s. So my dad was a young man from Pakistan, Punjab in Pakistan. And one day he told his parents that he wanted to pursue a better future for himself and his future family outside of the country. So he packed his bag and his luggage, a pair of flip-flops, a few t-shirts, and then he took the bus from Punjab in Pakistan to Iran, from Iran to Turkey, Turkey to Germany, and then he started looking for potential work. He was an educated engineer, but it was extremely difficult to find a job at that time. But because Norway just found oil, they were opening the borders up for workers and immigrations to the country. So my dad took the boat from Germany over to Oslo in Norway. And then, like everybody else at that time who immigrated, he started knocking on the doors of the factories to ask for jobs. One after the second after the third, and he got no after no after no. And the day before he was supposed to leave back because he needed a job to get a permit to stay, he knocked on one factory door, and that person needed a person to work for him. And my dad was there with a friend. He got a job. His friend didn't. His friend moved back. My dad stayed. And those were the circumstances and maybe even luck that made his first move in building and paving the pathway for me and my story as well. Now, my dad worked a lot of lower socioeconomic jobs. He cleaned bathrooms, and he was washing plates in hotels and restaurants, even though he was an educated engineer. And one day he told himself that he wanted to move to the east part of Norway. He wanted to build his own fortune, and he became an entrepreneur. And that's where my story starts as well, from a lower socioeconomic family of immigrants on what I like to call an average-sized Pakistani family. We're 8 siblings. And because I'm born and raised in a lower socioeconomic background, we couldn't really afford anything beyond just be able to get food. I had to start working at a very early stage. And I got my first job at the age of 13 as a newspaper delivery boy. And I used a couple of salaries to buy a cell phone. I don't know if you recall that, a lot of you young people, but around 10 years ago, the phone you were seeing on the bottom there was the high state-of-the-art tech, the phone, polyphonic ringtones and monochrome display. Shout out if you remember those days, the Nokia phones. And I bought that phone, and I used it for around a month's time. And then I managed to lose it in the water. And you can imagine a young boy who's worked very, very hard to be able to afford that phone. Obviously, it's a sad day, but I need to get a new phone. So I went on a classified ads website. I started finding used phones, and I used what I call negotiation skills, or somebody would call Pakistani haggling, to buy a phone for a cheap price. I used it for around 6 months' time, and then I managed to sell it for more than I bought it for. And I thought, this is a business opportunity. And that was the start of my first venture. So between the age of 13 and 15, I've bought and sold more than 150 phones. And at that time, you need to buy content for your phone as well. So I went online, I Googled and self-learned coding, different coding languages, and we built this portal where you could upload your own content and download it for a tenth of the price. And that was kind of the mentality that I received from my parents, that no matter who you are, where you come from, your socioeconomic class, your ethnicity, your cultural background, your faith, or your gender, don't let your background be a limitation of what you want to achieve in life. If you can't achieve it, if you can't find it, seek it. And if you don't find it after you sought it, then create the opportunity you initially don't have. And that really became a driving factor for me to really kind of showcase that anybody could succeed in a country which was quite wealthy as Norway was. But when you are from an immigrant background, you don't look like anybody else who are the ethnic majority in the country. You tend to meet a lot of prejudices, a lot of racism, a lot of people who don't believe in you. And because I was in a very small town with 30,000 inhabitants, I met a lot of teachers and peers who almost, not only on a daily basis, but almost on a daily basis, told me that you need to reduce your level of ambition. Not necessarily because I wasn't good enough, but because I looked different. And I had teachers who had to kind of examine my exams because they didn't believe that somebody like me could get good marks. And I had teachers who told in front of the class that it's not possible, like a person like me who can achieve those marks. And for me, that became a really like a driving factor to showcase that anyone can succeed regardless of what people believe in you or not. So I knew that in order for me to showcase that I could succeed as well, I could not only tell them that I could succeed, but I had to work twice as hard to get half the way. And in addition to, obviously, as you can see in the picture, gaining 30 more kilos and became quite obese at that time, because that became a huge mental challenge for me, I had to kind of start working twice as hard as anybody else and really start to showcase that I could excel as well. And if you want everybody to show and showcase them that you can succeed, you can no longer be good. You have to be exceptional. And for me, that became the driving force, really the mantra to showcase that anyone could succeed. And that started yielding results. So at first in 2010, I became the first business student of the year who had non-Norwegian background, to become the best student across all schools and universities. In 2011, we won the Harvard Business School Project Award, and 2013, the Best Thesis Award. And even though I've achieved all of these things, I still felt that the business sector and the organizational world was very homogeneous, and I still felt a lack of belonging and a lack of inclusion in the organization and the business world. So for me, that became a huge challenge. I left the country, first to the US, then later on worked in Malaysia and Brazil and Mauritius and in the UK as well. And the more I traveled, the more I started to understand that all the narrative that I've been hearing all through my life, that I'm a liability, that my background is a problem, was really a false narrative. The fact that I speak 5 languages, understand multiple cultures, in addition to being really good at what I was doing, was a huge competitive advantage. And that was the initiation and the commencement of my work to work on diversity, equity, and inclusion, to really talk about why diversity is not a problem, it's a misunderstood concept. It's a huge untapped potential for any country in the world. We really need to reap the benefit of all of the population, the diversity of the population, to really make sure that we create innovation, we create financial returns, and we create economies which can thrive for the future. And over the past 10 years, that's the question I've been working on. It's been very much driven by kind of my own background and my story. So I wanted to start by kind of sharing that story with you guys, but I also want to kind of start with posing a question, because we all know diversity is not a choice, it's a reality. Diversity is in all elements around us. What we need to focus on is on inclusion and belonging through active leadership. So for you who are participating, I just want to kind of hear from you guys. What do you define as diversity? What is diversity for you? Just write down kind of keywords in the chat. Any words that you have, any thoughts? What is diversity for you? Beauty, riches of cultures. Love that. Embracing differences, power. I love that what you're writing, Aleha. If and forgive me if I didn't pronounce your name correctly, but the variety is really kind of it's a good word. Intersectionality, the inevitable potential that one may possess. Absolutely. Alea. That's awesome. I need to get a course in learning names as well. I know about my own kind of name. My name is pronounced Javad, but the way the Norwegians pronounce this is Javad. And sometimes when I want to be a bit more fancy, they call me Shavad. And sometimes I've even heard Javad. I don't know. Maybe they thought I was Latin because of my mustache. But diversity is initially anything or everything that makes us different. Right? Whatever we represent that makes us different. I'll walk a bit more through kind of the terminology, because a lot of times in contexts we talk about diversity in some contexts as gender diversity, or we talk about it as ethnic or cultural diversity. So when we start talking about, I want to start by kind of sharing the difference between diversity, inclusion, and belonging. So when we talk about diversity, it's just kind of the numbers in a room in the differences that we talk about. It can be we are 50% women in the room, or 50% with ethnic minority background, or we are 20% who are wearing white shoes. It can be 10% who are wearing glasses. So anything that we quantify as something which is different between a certain kind of group of people. But really, like having diversity in a room or in an organization setting is not what is creating that magic of perspectives of diversity and creating innovation. We can have a lot of diversity in a room, but unless we talk about inclusion, we are not doing anything with the diversity. So inclusion is that active approach in creating those incentives, initiatives, or things that will actively include and lead that diversity to be part of that part that we're part of, whether that's an organization or a business or something entirely different. But really where we want to be is create a sense of belonging, regardless of who you are, what you look like, where you're from, your age, your gender, or ethnicity. If you can be in a place where you feel a sense of belonging and don't be in a need of categorizing or isolating you in groups, that's really the culture that we want to create in anywhere that we are, whether that's in an organization or in your company or in an entirely different place or in a community. So we often use a metaphor that we talk about diversity is being invited to the party. Inclusion is like being asked to the dance. And belonging is like watching and dancing like no one's watching, like what you do in front of a Sunday mirror when you don't think anybody's watching. That's really kind of where the sense of belonging and what we should be striving for. And I would also want to kind of make a difference between the concept of equality on one side, where everybody gets an equal opportunity. But the reality is that if we have a marathon, and if we are giving everybody the same opportunity to start at the same starting line, we know that somebody will have an advantage of running a bit faster than other people because of certain limitations. So really what we need to talk about is equity. So what you can see here is that on the left-hand side, everybody has the same box that they can stand on to really watch the game. But that doesn't mean that everybody will be able to watch the game in the exact same way. So when you talk about equity, we have to push some people who have been disadvantageously placed over many decades because of systemic inequalities to make sure that we boost them and accelerate them so everybody gets the same outcome. So when we talk about equity in an organizational perspective, we don't give everybody the same opportunities, but sometimes we need to positively discriminate to make sure that everybody can get to the same position. And in a lot of cases, we need to move from talking about equality of opportunities to talk about how do we provide an equitable approach so everybody, regardless of who you are, and in a marathon, if you're starting 3 kilometers behind, that you can be able to actually get to the phase where you can compete on equal terms. And when you talk about diversity as well, there's 2 elements that is really correlated to better results. And I really kind of, stress that, because a lot of times we feel like diversity is just something that we're born with, but it's really kind of 2 elements. And there are multiple ways of categorize that. Some things you're born with, you can't really change unless there is like a significant kind of, so traditionally, even though the gender kind of categories started to become a bit more diverse and broader as well, things like age or ethnical origin, etc., is something that you're born with. You can't really change that. If you are, like myself, 32 years old, I can't automatically change my age. That's something I'm born with. But that provides one inherent category of diversity. But we also need to acknowledge that we can acquire different elements which will bring new perspectives, and then a combination of both is what is driving innovation and better results. So acquired diversity can be anything from personal experience, you can be living abroad, or you can have certain stories in your life that is affecting the way you think. It can be what you've been educating. You can educate yourself to become a lawyer or economist or engineer or something entirely different. And those combination is what research is showcasing, is what's creating innovation and better results. And all of us possesses both of those, not just one category. And in the whole conversation about, why do we and how do we drive innovation, but also what is the role of organization when we talk about diversity, there's 2 elements we need to talk about. The first one is what we call cognitive diversity. So anything which is diversity of perspective. So the previous slide where we talk about the thoughts and the perspectives, which is a combination of who you are and what you're born with, but also what you acquire. Those thoughts collide, and that creates magic in terms of thinking new. So that's an important part in the conversation. We also need to know that not always, there isn't always a correlation between increased level of diversity and innovation. But organizations and societies still have a moral responsibility to make sure that everybody has that equitable and equal opportunity to succeed. So representation, even though it doesn't necessarily always lead to increased level of innovation, is an important element to consider into that whole conversation. And research is showcasing this, right? So there's a lot of research which is showcasing, but one of the most kind of cited one has been from McKinsey & Company, the consulting company, in 3 iterations. And the last iteration showcased that companies who are in the top quartile for gender equality, best in class of gender equality, have 25% higher likelihood of better financial returns compared to their industry medians. When it comes to ethnical diversity, 36% more likelihood for increased financial returns. And the companies who are the worst in both categories also have what you call the diversity punishment. You also tend to perform much poorer than your industry medians. So really, there's a good business case, and there's a lot of research which is supporting the foundation of us thinking about this as something which is creating financial returns in addition to the representation part. And I want to ask you again, what kind of diversity do you think drives innovation of what we talked so far? Just write it down in the chat. For the sake of time, I'll walk through it, but just feel free to just ask questions or write anything down in the chat as well. One of the studies which has been conducted by Boston Consulting Group in 2017 for 400 companies in Europe, they saw the correlation between certain types of diversity and how that correlates and bolster innovation. And what they found was that a lot of the acquired diversity have very high statistical significance when it comes to driving innovation. So your industrial background, your country of origin, your career path, and gender diversity are all positively correlated with diverse innovation. When it comes to your academic background, it doesn't have a statistical significance. And when it came to age diversity, which was almost a bit surprising, was that it had negative statistical significance, which means that your age diversity, the extent to which managers are evenly distributed across age groups, is actually associated with less innovation. When it comes to how this make impact on the financial returns of innovation. So just to get back to a few of the elements that we talked about. So why should it matter for you in any organization that you're part of? If you want to attract the best talent, regardless of who they are and how they look like, you often tend to choose people who look like yourself, regardless. That's just the bias that we have. And for us to attract the best talent, regardless of who we are, we also need to have representation inside our own organization. A lot of times, organization, when they talk about let's attract diversity and diverse groups to work for us because we need the best problem solvers, they don't tend to reflect that inside the organizations. So that needs to be a correlation there. It also, when it goes back to the cognitive diversity, you don't want to have a lot of people around the table who are just nodding around the head. Diversity sometimes can be very uncomfortable, but that uncomfort and almost like positive conflict is what is driving you to think new about kind of the biases that you have. And that is what can help improve quality of decision making. It can also help you understand better your customer group or the people that you're working for. If you have a lot of people with ethnic minority groups or a lot of women that you're working for, then you also need to have the representation to make a better understanding of how this fits into how you understand the customer group better. I've seen a lot of cases in my investment company where we have my peers who are also working in investment companies. They tend not to invest in women or people with ethnic minority background. Not necessarily because they don't think they're good business cases, but they don't necessarily understand the business case because they lack the customer insight. And this is how we come in and how we really kind of say that, oh, we're actually working on impact investing. We understand your customer group. We're also investing in you because you have a good business case, and we think that's an advantage. There's a lot of research also showcasing that that sense of belonging also increases employer satisfaction, and also the company's image from a CSR point of view. So where do we start, and what are some best practices? I would love for you to just write down in chat, and if you're an organization or a company, and how do you start and where do you start? And whilst I'm talking about it, I would love for you to write down some of your best practices in the chat. It's difficult to know where you want to go unless you know where you are. So for me, data is extremely powerful. For you to understand where you are through data and transparency, it's going to be a key element. So if you don't have the data available, make sure you start creating the data. Do you know how many people how many females you have on all levels and how that correlates to the pay gap? Do you know how many people of ethnic minority background you have, or Western background, non-Western background, of different representation? Do you know how many people of different socioeconomic classes you have? The more data you get, the better you can also understand where you are. And that will also help you understand and define some clear targets on where you want to go, and also identify the gaps that you have. And really kind of having the data is not enough. That's back to kind of, you can have the numbers in diversity, but you need to work on having that roadmap for action, create that sense of inclusion in and throughout the organization that you have. And really where we want to be is where we want to institutionalize the process. So the fact that we need to sit there and talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion as something which is important to drive innovation and drive financial returns for the company is because we have a market failure. All organizations at some point in time should just understand why this is a key core part of the way we operate as an organization, how this is part of the culture, the way we recruit, the way we retain talents, but also the way we provide an equitable opportunity within an organization. So I would also, in given kind of the topic, one of the key elements here is that understanding and acknowledging, and also understanding the unconscious bias. And I would want to give you a short introduction to the concept of unconscious bias. But here I would want to start with a case. And if you've heard about this case, don't just write it down. But when I say that you can write down what you think the answer is, do. So if you heard about the case, don't write it down yet. I think it would be great for people who haven't known. So a father and a son, they're involved in a terrible car accident. The man, in this case the father, he dies instantly at the case. But when the child arrives at the hospital and is rushed to the operating room, the surgeon withdraws and says, "I cannot operate on this boy. It's my son. How can that be?" So I give you 20 seconds to have a think about it, and then when I say go, just write down what you think the answer is in the chat. Go for it. If you have an answer, please write it in the chat now. I love that you nailed it. Obviously, this is something that some of you may have heard, and exactly I was waiting for that answer as well, Kulan, because a lot of the time our biases are making us think that a surgeon is traditionally a man, and as a consequence, they struggle. And I've been in a lot of leadership contexts where I've presented the case as well. A lot of people, and even a lot of times in almost majority female gatherings as well, they don't know the answer. And it can be a lot of different answers. The surgeon can be the mother, the surgeon can have two fathers, etc. But these are unconsciously, making us think that the case is making us rethink what the biases we have. And everybody has biases. I have bias, and you have bias. We'll get back to that. I want to just do a very quick one on the second case. Use 15 seconds to look at. Yeah, the picture. Do you see an old woman or a young woman? You weren't supposed to see the right thing. But how old do you think the woman is on the left? Just write down in the chat. And it doesn't matter. There's no real answer to that. So it's quite interesting. Young, around 25. And so if I ask you, is everybody seeing the both of them? So if you look at if you look at my cursor, can you see that where I'm pointing? If you see that, that's the nose. Do you see an old woman now? The ones who said she was young. So in the image, we have a young woman and an old woman. And the interesting fact, there's also like an age bias that we have. And a lot of times the people who are young tend to see only the young woman, and the people who are old tend to see the old woman. Exactly. So that's the bias. It's subconsciously our mind is making us think one or the other. And depending on your you are, and in this case, the age bias, you can tend to be affected by your background and not really think about it. And then you only see one perspective and not both perspectives, and you lose out on one of the perspectives. These are just two very effective ways of showcasing how biases can work. And while I'm talking, do you think that you have any biases? Can you give any examples? Just write it down in the chat on any type of biases that you think that you may have, that you've caught yourself in having. Everybody can have biases. Any examples would be great to hear from you guys as well. So just whilst you're talking, I'll just walk through kind of the concept. So bias is an inclination or prejudice for or against one person or group, especially when when it's considered unfair. Or bias is the way we're going to subconsciously think about something. The way it's been kind of wired, if you think about the history of biases, that over many, not hundreds of years, but thousands of years, the way we've been wired is that because we receive so much information, we take shortcuts in what we think and assume about a certain group, because that was the instinct of survival for us as human beings many hundreds and thousands of years ago. So we have what we call conscious biases, which is explicit bias you're aware of. We also have unconscious biases, which is the implicit bias. And this is an interesting fact. So we receive 11 million bits of information every moment. So much information at that time. And we can consciously, explicitly only process 40 bits, which means that in every wink of your eye, 99.9999996% is processed unconsciously. And that means something. That means that I have bias, you have biases, and it matters. It matters for how we make decisions, but it also matters for how we make sure that we're aware of our biases in the way we proceed when it comes to diversity, equity, and inclusion. And that back to kind of the shortcut thing, that it's just developed over many centuries and many millenniums on the way that the human being has evolved as well to make shortcuts, because it was an instinct of survival to take shortcuts. But those shortcuts are also becoming a huge way of creating those systemic barriers and inequalities over many decades and many years, which is why we see so homogeneous groups in top levels, typically ethnically white majority males, built up structures which have maybe not conscious, but and sometimes consciously, but definitely unconsciously built up system structures, which is preferential for some groups other than others. So unconscious bias, there's 4 things that can make a situation more prone to discrimination. One is tasks. So typically occupational groups and stereotypes, for instance, nurse and gender, or surgeon and male, for instance, those can be association with tasks. And those are lingual stereotypes that we need to work on to make sure they're neutral. Second is numbers. So when you look at a group of things, like a group of job seekers where there's a clear minority group, minority can be in gender, it can be ethnicity, it can be in age, our brain is more likely to pick up some unconscious stereotypes you have associated with this group. So it can be, if there's a clear minority of women, we can start having association that these women have X, Y, and Z traits. Or if these people have an ethnic minority background, if it's a clear minority, we tend to group them and not think about them as individuals. And that's subconsciously done based on the stereotype that we built up over many years based on the experiences and the process of information that we processes. The third is around clarity. So we don't always have all the information. So information asymmetry is making us make worse decisions. So when take, for example, a case of a sale, you go to a store and you find a pant for $20. And that's based on, you say that's the cheapest pant I know that I have. And it's based on 4 other stores that you've seen. But maybe if there's a 5th store where the pant cost $15, would you say that you've made the most optimal decision? Or did you make the best decision based on the information asymmetry, the lack of information that you had? And I think in a lot of cases, we tend to have stereotypes and prejudices because we don't meet enough people and we don't have all the information. So typically, one of the concepts which I like very much in Denmark, which is called the human library, you can, instead of renting books, you can rent a person who has like a type like an unemployed or a drug addict or something. And then you can listen to the stories. You can gain more information and hopefully also reduce the prejudices. So make sure that information asymmetry is not the cause of us having bad decision making. The last one is recipient. So us and all of us, we can always be affected if you're stressed, in hurry, or in emotional, quite emotional. We can get things done quickly, but if you do that in a lot of rush and with a lot of emotions involved, it may not be the best decision made. So a lot of times we need to ask other people, do you think that I'm objectively making the right decision, or is this an emotionally or subjective decision that I think is objective? So those four things are things that we need to kind of be conscious about when it comes to understanding a situation becoming more prone to discrimination because of our unconscious biases. And just to give a case example, even a little bias can have significant consequences. So there was this case study where they saw approximately 500 people. L1 is the lowest level. L8 is the highest level in an organization, a fictional organization. It can be the C level. And then you start by 50% distribution between men and women. And on all level, you assume the same assumption that 10% reduce and drop off because of different circumstances is equally distributed between both genders. And then we say that the scale of performance is between 0 to 5. That's how you get measure on how you're good or not. And if you do the simulation 500 times, I think it was approximately 500 times, and you have the same assumption and the same scale for everybody, you still end up getting the same result in the end. So it's not kind of any skewness towards one another. But if you only put 1% variance in performance scores for men, you can get, instead of getting 0 to 5, you can get 0 to 5, 5.01. But for women, you can only get between 0 to 5. So you put like a very, very small 1% variance. That means that men can get a slightly better score. 5.01 is a very small variance. But if you do the simulation, I think approximately 500 times, this is how the distribution is going to look like after the simulation. Only 35% of level 8 employees would be top level, would be female. So even a small skewness in you being preferential or giving a better score to one gender over the other, or having any systemic and structural inequalities, can lead to, over time, huge inequalities to make those very homogeneous group who are sitting now on the power on top. So we need to be very kind of aware of how do we build systems and structures where objectively the right system and measurement to make sure that we actually have the same equal but also equitable approach to make sure we get the same fair opportunities across all dimensions when we talk about career progression. The four ways I would want to kind of end up with before I open the floor for a conversation with you guys as well on strategies on how we can eliminate unconscious bias or addressing and eliminating. The first one is making structures for success. So it's very important that in any situation we are in, when it comes to organization, when it comes to communities or societies, we use consistent requirements, criteria, and structures. We write it down in advance. There's no biases when it comes to one or the second. It's very objective measurements. We build in those structure and criteria. We use methodologies like structured interviews. We have the diversity in interview panels to make sure we don't have unconscious biases. And we also need to make sure that we objectively know what success looks like for a particular role. And we know that there's a lot of research done on this, that if you have a foreign-sounding name, you have 25% less likelihood to be called into an interview. This has been done research in the US, it's been done same research in Norway. You see the same less probability if you have a foreign-sounding name. And there's a case where they see the operas, I think it was the 5 operas in the US in the 70s, where they had lack of female representation. And they said that we don't find qualified women to be part of the operas. But the reality was that they need to kind of look into the structure. So what they started looking into was that because all the 4 people who were judging the female people on female or woman on audition, they were men. And they said, obviously, we're very objective, we are neutral, we don't discriminate towards one gender or another. But then they introduced blind auditions. And blind audition, put a black blindfold in front of, I think, black blindfold or a black curtain in front of the judge panel and also the auditioner. And that in itself led to a double-digit increase in how many women actually progressed from phase 1 to phase 2. And then they started thinking about, okay, is there a way for us to think about, things which are subconsciously built into the system? And the second thing, they figured out that even though they had blind audition, there was still a scene and where they performed, which was made out of wood. And a lot of the women in the 70s, they used high heels. So even though they couldn't see the woman when they walk on the stage, they could hear the sound of the high heels clicking on the floor. And subconsciously, they knew that it was a woman, that was a barrier. So what they introduced was that everybody walked barefooted onto the on a carpet onto the stage and performed. And that also led to an increase in how many women actually walked and passed through the auditions, and increased the number of women actually getting into the opera. So we need to be very conscious about not only the things that we can measure and map, but also those subtle things that we don't think exist, but can be of hindrance to make sure that everybody has an equal and equitable opportunity. The second is what I told about data. You can only improve what you can measure. So make sure you have data and transparency, but also build that into your product and design. And one of the cases we see that when YouTube was launched in 2005, 2006, 10% of the videos were upside down. And the reason why we're upside down is that because Google looked at themselves and said, we have diversity in our team. We have racial diversity, we have culture diversity, we have gender diversity, we have age diversity. Why are there still 10% of all the videos upside down? And what they didn't know was that the way, which is subconsciously, that all the engineers in the team were right-handed. So that time when you had a smartphone, you take it up in the right hand and you flip it to landscape mode in the right hand. But if you were left-handed, you took it on the other hand, you flipped it the opposite way. And all the left-handed people need to have the video upside down. And when you acknowledge that, when you measure that, you could also address that. So make sure that whenever you're building solutions for inclusion, that you also address how that translates into an inclusive design and approach. And make sure data is key there. Then the third one is around evaluating subtle messages. So not only about having the structures and the data and the processes, but also how our body language is how does our office look like? Are we having a very male and masculine dominated type? How do we make sure that we take into account when we invite for dinners, etc., that we take into account that not everybody have the same food preferences? What signal do we kind of express externally and send out externally? From the images that we put on our product site to kind of the way we speak, we also send unconscious messages. So make sure that we know the power of our signals, and also the way we also signal them, not only internally, but also externally. And the last one I want to mention is the mechanism for accountability. We can have all these processes and structures and data on board, but we also need to hold people accountable for making that change. We need to hold top leaders accountable. We need to hold middle management accountable. We need to ask and justify the decision. We need to ask for feedback. We need to create this culture where you can actually say that and call out when you see somebody who's not being objective when it comes to those situations. And those are kind of the situations we want to talk about. I just want to kind of do a bit shameless plug-in, but we started some work back in Norway and the Nordics. So we know that this work we need to needs to start with the top leadership anchoring. So we've launched with my organization and with also a gender equality organization, something we call a CEO commitment, which is almost like what we call a Paris Agreement, a leader-driven Paris Agreement for diversity, equity, and inclusion. So unless we have top leader anchoring, we're not going to get that trickle-down effect. And unless you as a CEOs don't commit to this, you can have those side things in an organization. It's not going to get the same effect that you have organization. So in a month's time, we have more than 40 of the largest organizations in the Nordics sign this. We want to have 1,000 organizations by end of 2022. And we would love to have organizations also outside of the Nordic countries to be part of this. So if you want to learn more about this, go to ceocommitment.com and you can learn more about it. And you can also reach out to me. We got a full page in the largest business magazine where we talk about how business leaders are really kind of embracing this, and how organizations are now moving beyond just talking about diversity, equity, and inclusion to understanding why this is not only the responsibility putting on the agenda, but also understanding how this can be a huge competitive advantage. And I also want to mention that there's a few elements which I personally believe we need to have as part of solving the big SDGs by 2030. We need young people 70% of the population is below global population below age of 30. We need to have young people to be part of decision making, to be part of asking and demanding, but also be part of the tables. We need systems thinking and systems leadership and system entrepreneurship, thinking about not only isolated approaches, but also think about how we solve for the larger system inequalities. We need to have innovation and technology as the backbone of what we do, and we need to have diversity, equity, and inclusion as a key driver to solving the big challenges that we're facing between now and 2030. And I think those are some of the key elements that we need to have as a foundation to solving the global challenges and by the end of 2030. And I think diversity, equity, and inclusion is going to be a key element. We know that diversity drives innovation and profitability. If played right, it can be a key element in solving the global challenges. We have the data, we have the facts, we have the research. The question is not only the organization, but what will you do, you who are sitting here in this audience, to make sure that we utilize this opportunity and potential in diversity and inclusion. The time is now, and it's time to act. So thank you very much for listening to this. I would love for you to get on stage. I don't know how much time we have left, but I think we at least have 10 more minutes left. Just raise up, 5 minutes left. Just raise your hands, and I would love to bring you on stage and just share your thoughts or reflections. Was there anything that you found new, or just some thoughts or reflections that you had? And is there anything you want to share just on this topic? I would love to hear from you guys. Let me see if I can bring some people up. I think you just break your hands. Thank you very much for that, Hulan.
Hi. Oh my gosh, I'm sorry. I don't want to show my video. It's really early. I'm still in pajamas, to be honest. But hi, my name is Alija Newman. I wanted to say thank you so much for having this this workshop. And I think what stood out for me was your facts on how there's increased financial return when you have diversity in the workplace. I studied sociology in school, so I've learned a lot about systematic oppression and structural power. But I don't think I've ever seen any research that verifies that increasing diversity in the workplace actually has a benefit for the company. I think sometimes companies just want to do something because they care about profit, which kind of sucks. But at least I could bring that to someone and say, well, this would be for your benefit too, whether you care or not. So it's kind of nice to know that there's a way to incentivize people.
Absolutely. And thank you very much for sharing that. And I think you're absolutely right. The interesting part is that I think businesses need to play a key role in solving inequalities. And the problem is that why should I care about this? Is often the question that I get from the business leaders, because they often think about we need to kind of maximize our shareholder value, and we need to make sure that we deliver on our results and our profits. And then I tell them, hey guys, let me tell you about a way where you can actually increase the likelihood of making even more money that you're currently making. And suddenly they are interested in listening to you guys. I think it's extremely powerful to bring them on board, whether that's for financial, returns, or whether that's for something entirely different. But whether you use the kind of that, systemic inequalities approach of, things that is not fair and equitable, or use that financial and innovation kind of, approach, or a combination of both, I think it can be an extremely powerful narrative to really bring on board people to drive the change.
Thank you. And thank you for your vulnerability and sharing your history today. I appreciate that.
No, thank you very much. And Hulan, I would, absolutely, just check out the human library concept in Denmark. And I think it's something you all should check out. How can you, just instead of you don't even need to do it in your brand, just ask yourself, if in your communities or organizations, how can I spend 30 minutes to meet someone I haven't met yet? One of the things one of the person did in my organization where I used to work in the past, we had 15,000 employees. He said, for a month's time, every day I'm going to take a lunch, whether that's virtually or it's in person, with a new person that I don't know from before, who has a different background and who I want to learn from. And I think those are the ways we really kind of reduce our, prejudices. We'll learn a lot. So take that concept of the human library, invite people to take 30 minutes with, learning from people that you haven't met before. I think it's gonna just create this magical atmosphere that it's gonna help us really drive this progress. So, question from Allah: how can an organization measure the success of diversity training and changing attitudes of the staff? I think a lot of organizations are only thinking about, okay, we do trainings and we can measure how many people have participated in trainings, so that can be some metrics. Look at us, we have 20% who participated in this D&I training. But the reality is, for me, is that it needs to result in something, whether that's short, medium, or long term. So if you do this training, what has that led to? And it's not only led to an increase in the number of lack of representation, whether that's female representation, or you can say we have 20% more women applying to our jobs, or we have 30% women who are increasing in the career ladder. But also make sure that you have a culture of inclusion. You can have 50% of women in an organization, and you can have 30% people with ethnic minority background. But if they don't feel like they're included or a sense of belonging, then the numbers don't matter. So I think it's not only what you measure, but how you measure what matters. So make sure that there's a lot of indicators that exist out there, that you not only measure the progression and not just taking the training, measure the progression on diversity, but also measure the progression on inclusion, to make sure that it's not only about the numbers that you put in a room, but also making sure how you reap the benefit and the potential of those cognitive diversity that we have. Feel free to ask any other questions if you have, or if you want to just jump on the stage. I know we don't have much time left. Gloria is on stage.
Yes, thank you so much, Javad. Thank you so much. This has been an amazing session, incredible insights, and I've taken away key highlights. I've made lots of notes myself. I found it absolutely fascinating, and I learned that data is key when designing solutions with the aim of integrating diversity and inclusion. And we need to hold people accountable to make these changes. And at most, the most important thing is that we need young people to support the achievement of sustainable goals in 2030. So for everyone who is watching, thank you so much to Javad and everyone who has joined us today. I know you have only a couple of minutes after this session for us to join back the live plenary on the live stage, where we have more in store for you. Thank you, because I know Javad has shared his contacts with us. If you need to make further engagement with him, please feel free to do so. Thank you so much, Javad, and thank you, everyone. In the next couple of minutes, we can start moving now to the live plenary. But if anyone has anything that you need to say to Javad in the next 2 minutes, feel free to do so.
Thank you very much, everybody, for joining in. It's been great to have you on board, and would love to connect with you. Let me know if there's anything I can do to help or support or contribute to anything at all. I think we're all in this together to make sure that we actually drive progression on not only diversity and inclusion, but also towards 2030 and the big goals. So super excited to see that so many people who are interested in this topic, and look forward to engaging with you also outside of this. So thank you very much, and we'll see you in the plenary.